First of all, I have to sort of start out and say I'm really excited to be back here at Grace Hopper, India. I had the honor and the privilege of attending the very first Grace Hopper India 10 years ago when there were about 600 women, and so it's really exciting to see the growth in the growth in this program and the growth in women in technology. Um, Navita introduced me as CTO and SVP of engineering for Digital Guardian. I want to just take 2 seconds and talk about what Digital Guardian is because I think it'll help set the context for what I'm going to talk about today. So Digital Guardian is a DLP and EDR company targeted to the enterprise. So DLP, for those who are not familiar, is data leak prevention or data loss protection. There's about 4 different acronyms that are used depending upon the particular strategy that each company is using in this space, and also endpoint detection and response. So the ability to identify when there is malware on a particular endpoint and then take action for it. When I was thinking about putting this session together, one of the images that I was looking at was the old Spy versus Spy from Mad Magazine, and that may be a cultural image that doesn't resonate here, but it was 2 identically pictured images of a black spy and a white spy, and one was the good guy and one was the bad guy, and they did exactly the same things. So, they would have the little bombs with the fuse on it, and the 2 of them would throw them at each other. This is kind of the paradigm that we have today around security and the black hat community. We use many of the same techniques that the black hats use in order to protect the systems from the black hats. One of the things that I am going to be talking about today, though, is sort of a bit of a change that's come into the dynamic of this over the last, particularly 2 to 3 years, although this has begun, substantially longer ago than this. And this is the participation of the platform vendors of, Apple and Microsoft and Google and the others that, IBM, that create the operating systems, and the work that those platform teams are doing to help prevent malware from becoming, from continuing to be the ongoing threat that it is and has been for the last 20 years. In particular, let me shift to sort of my next slide here. The gentleman from State Street mentioned the statistics around the growth of malware, and his statistics are a little different from mine because mine is specifically focused here on endpoint malware. These statistics also were from the 2018 report, which covered 2017 data. Very recently, the 2019 reports have come out, and I was interested to see how that's changed since I actually put the presentation together about 3 weeks ago, and the numbers are going up. So in 2017, 92% of all malware was delivered by email. That's now up to 94%, and that's on the endpoint. That means that email is the most significant vector for the delivery of malware onto your laptop or your desktop. Trojans make up 51.5 approximately percent of all malware. So these are applications that are posing as something else in order to collect information from you in a nefarious way. 7 out of 10 payloads are ransomware. The increase in ransomware over the last couple of years has become really substantial. I was at a conference recently in New York and talking to a friend of mine who was the CTO for a large information management company, and she was getting up and leaving the conference about every 5 minutes because they were in the middle of a ransomware attack, and they were trying to see if they were going to be able to restore their systems as a result of it. The next one, 230,000 new malware samples are produced every day. This is now, in the last report, gone up to 350,000. Right? That's just an extraordinary amount of change and variability in the system. 34% of businesses hit with malware took a week or more to regain access to their data. This is a cost that is tremendous to the business across the world. Natural disasters, we're all astounded when they take the business down for 2 days or 3 days, and here malware does it for a week on average when it strikes. Ransomware attacks worldwide are up 350%, and it's estimated that they're going to cost more than $6 trillion annually by 2021. So the state of this, too, is if you look at this, this is not getting any better. All of the tools and technologies and techniques that all of us in the white hat community have been applying to solve this problem hasn't made that trend line go down. That trend line is continuing up. And this is one of the reasons why the operating system, vendors are starting to come in and starting to add, additional capabilities into the system to make it more difficult for viruses and for malware to be successfully propagated in organizations. So one of the things, too, that's happened in the last couple of years is the increase in malware on the Mac. And, in the past, Windows has really been the platform that most malware has been targeted towards. It was the business application platform, and, the Macintosh, and Apple tended to be more towards the consumer side of the house, and so there wasn't as much targeted towards the Mac. That's really starting to change now, and so we're seeing growth in attacks in the Mac at really substantial levels. 60% increases in in a half year, with detected threats increasing, and adware becoming 200% increase in that same time frame. Now, one of the things that's really important to do here is to kind of put that in context. So even though the malware on the Mac is growing at this incredibly rapid pace, when you take a look at the number of attacks on the Apple platform compared to those on the Windows platform, all of the attacks that take place in last year on the Apple platform was equivalent to 1 week of attacks. 1 hour of attacks on the Windows platform. So the scale is still really different, but the growth is going very rapidly, and Apple is very concerned about ensuring that their platform is considered to be, the safe platform here. Below this, we just have sort of an example of the kind of attack that we're talking about here. So, we've got an end user on the Mac, downloading some kind of freeware app from, Softpedia, bypassing the App Store, or bypassing some other mechanism that would protect from from the app being a Trojan horse or some other kind of virus, and that gets installed on the computer and then starts to monitor behavior, capture data, and propagate across the organization. So I want to shift just a little bit, sort of setting the stage on what the space is looking like a bit here, and talk a little bit about that spy versus spy characteristic here. So if I take a look at the techniques that are being used, so in this situation, we're talking about sort of a browser injection technique, and how the browser injection technique is used in malware, and how the browser injection technique is being used in security software to protect against the malware. So in the case of the the malware, banker Trojan, injects a malicious thread into the browser, and once it's injected into the browser, it hooks the APIs that that send traffic back and forth. So you're able to look at the data that's moving in and out of the browser and be able to capture things like passwords or personally identifiable information or other types of valuable data. And when you look at that paradigm for security software, right, it's exactly the same thing. So we do, also inject into the browser, and then we hook into those APIs. But now what we're doing that for is to be actually looking for egress of data, not to steal it, but to prevent it from escaping either through a malicious vector, or through a user who just doesn't understand what the policy should be, or through the malicious insider who's looking to steal data from the company. Perhaps a disgruntled employee who is looking to leave and wants to bring financial information or customer lists or other information out with them. So we have a saying that if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. And this isn't always the case. So what I have here is, looking at some of the characteristics of malware and then some of the characteristics of security software and showing, the extent to which those things are extremely similar. So in malware, one of the objectives of a good piece of malware is that it's hard to find, that it hides itself, that if you do find it, it's hard to get rid of it. It's, tamper resistant. It prevents the user from readily being able to delete it if they can find it. Its objective is to go find valuable information in the system. It's also looking to control or modify application behavior, intercept read or write activities, so looking for valuable data across the entire endpoint, and or any data that happens to touch the endpoint or pass through the endpoint. It's looking potentially, if it's ransomware, to encrypt that data so that it can then hold it for ransom. And then ultimately the objective there is to steal or destroy the data. Now, if you look at the other side of the house, which is the white hat, the security, we also are looking for something which is potentially stealthy and tamper resistant, right? So we want this for a different reason. We want this so that the end user of the on the corporate network isn't interfered with at all by the presence of it. So it's only stealthy and tamper resistant to the end user and not to the IT organization that manages the technology. But we do also want to make sure that if there is a relatively sophisticated end user, that they can't remove it, because the intent is for the enterprise to be able to protect that information from being exfiltrated by a malicious or a incompetent employee. We're looking to find that valuable information, which means that we're going to want to be able to do things like do a full disk scan and look at all of the information that resides everywhere within the organization. We're looking to be able to control and modify application behavior itself. And so why do we potentially want to do that? We want to do that so that we can track when data is being manipulated by a malicious insider, so that we can prevent it from being encoded or obfuscated to, encoded or obfuscated during an application. So if I open up a particular file and I, copy and paste something that's sensitive information and I put it someplace else and maybe I encrypt it, I want to be able to know that's happening. And so we need to be able to trace inside the flow in applications so that we can track that along. And then we want to be able to potentially encrypt data. So if someone wants to go send something onto a removable media, we may have a policy that says we're going to encrypt it when we deliver it onto the system. And ultimately, this is all with the intent of protecting data. So let's talk about the entrance of the platforms into the malware battle. So, for many years, it's been the white hats and the black hats fighting against each other. But now, the operating systems are becoming much more active in terms of the capabilities that they're bringing into the operating systems, such that it's making it much more difficult for the black hats to be able to use some of these core techniques that have been used for a generation to, insert and inject malware into the system. So on the Apple side, starting in El Capitan and moving and increasing in Mojave and Catalina, capabilities for Gatekeeper, which, if you're familiar with the platform, is the ability to prevent applications that are downloaded without a sanction, so not through the App Store or not through some other kind of sanctioned mechanism, but through the internet, for example, to be blocked from being able to execute. And this ensures that something can't slide into your system and then be executed without you knowing it. User consent, a lot of the things that are potential egress vectors like the microphone or the camera or access to file systems are now under user consent. So, within the operating system, the user actually has to specifically say this application is okay to use this capability. Again, preventing malware from being able to get access to resources on your system without your permission. And system integrity protection. This is one of the areas that both of the Mac and the Windows platforms are really starting to move forward into, and this is protections, essentially protecting the system against being modified during the boot up process, being modified by a non-operating system technology, and to prevent it from, a situation where a virus can get in and then insert itself into the boot sequence and then be able to have control over the system from then on in. And so both system integrity protection and also System Guard from Microsoft have the same types of capabilities. In this case, it is a direct locking down of the system directories to make them effectively off limits to anything except for the operating systems themselves. So what I'm going to do, I have 2 minutes left, so I have a couple of examples, but I'm just going to walk through one of them really quickly. So here's the Mac kernel extensions. If you write drivers in the Mac or you write security software in the Mac, kernel extensions is one of the techniques that you use all the time. It creates a great amount of power, and it allows you to have access to many different parts of the system and have visibility into things that are happening all across the system. It essentially gives you, think of like a root access. This is one of the areas that Mac is removing from the operating system, so it's been deprecated and it is continually being restricted. We expect it to disappear fairly soon entirely. It's being replaced with OS X system extensions, so it has the same capabilities as kernel extensions, but it runs in user space instead of inside the kernel, and it is constrained to the system security policies that are implemented in the operating system itself. And so there's 3 different types of them. There's the network, there's the endpoint security, which is the one that's really interesting to security companies, and then there's the driver system extension APIs. These are brand new in Catalina, and they're just sort of emerging now to see what level of capability they're going to provide. And so I think that is the end of my time. And so I will open it up for questions.
Maybe we can take one question. Anyone? We'll just pass on the mic. Okay, we have someone out there.
Hi, my name is Gajanan. Uh, so we talk about the malware.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about how we can remediate them.
Hmm.
Patching is one of the things. So when we introduce all these, guards on the system
Hmm.
itself, do we need to do we need patching as well? Uh,
So I think one of the things that we'll find is that for every time the door is closed to the malware creators, they're going to turn around and they're going to find some other vector in. So the one thing that I don't want to say at all is that this will prevent malware from being, created and delivered and deployed on the systems. It's going to force it to move into a different form factor, though, than, say, a kernel extension based um, form factor.